Today's subject, which is depression.
Yes.
Which is kind of a Pandora's box. It's a lot to unpack there.
It is. You know, it's so common, and people don't realize it. You know, and a lot of folks think that, well, I don't think I've ever been depressed. But then when you talk to them, well, you know, they've had, you know, periods of time, maybe sadness or whatever, and they put that to maybe a grieving process. Maybe they lost a loved one, or a parent, or a spouse, or whatever. And yeah, that's depression. And we see so much of that, really do. And it's just so common. And people, you know, it really kind of freaks a lot of people out because they don't know what to do about it. And there's a lot of things you can do about it. There's a lot. There really is.
You know, when there's a major event, sort of like the loss of a loved one,
right?
That's a triggered response, and it seems to be a common occurrence, but it could turn into something that becomes a little more serious.
Right. If you don't address it somehow, and you just kind of, as they say, it's a rabbit hole. You can just kind of go down that rabbit hole. It spirals downhill. And so you have to stop and do some things to kind of turn it around and get back to a happy life.
Addressing it, yes. Like hitting it head on, addressing it. So if somebody out there is curious if maybe depression is what they're going through, what are some of the common symptoms? You know,
one of the biggest things that you see is people, maybe they had a hobby, okay? So you've got a hobby, very into it, and all of a sudden they just lose interest. They don't want to do it anymore. Lose interest in a lot of things. So that's always a really biggie. Just feeling kind of sad for no reason. You know, why am I sad? I mean, life's supposedly pretty good to me, right? And yet they feel sad. That's always a big indicator. So those are two of probably the most common. And that's, if you talk to people around the patient that has this, they'll tell you that, yeah, you know, they used to be avid fishermen, or they were avid this or that or whatever, exercise constantly. Now all of a sudden they just don't do anything. That's the first sign.
So if we're talking about clinical depression, is there something that happens in the brain that causes this?
Yeah. Typically speaking, when you look at the problem with depression, it's a lot of our neurochemistry. And it's, I think today, because of our diet and so much other stuff that's going on in our food supply, is probably really kind of a culprit for it. Because when I was in school a long time ago, they told us that, well, you know, things like serotonin, that's a brain chemical, and it's made in your brain. A small amount is. The majority, somewhere like 80 to 90%, is actually made in your gut. So if we don't take care of the gut, we can lead to something like clinical depression. And that's one of the first things that we'll think about when treating it is, let's get that gut back to healthy, because if we don't, we're really probably never going to get the depression under control, really.
And I think this goes without saying, because we talk about this quite a good bit here on Doctor's Nutrition. Gut health begins with the things that you put in.
Yes.
And I guess that we start with the PPF, the packaged processed foods.
Yeah, right. Or ultra processed foods, they call them now. UCF, yeah. It's really kind of a UPF. Like it's so much that, you know, and I talk to people all the time and say, well, I have a really great diet. Okay, well, let's just stop and think about this for a moment. Research shows us that about 74% of the food consumed in America is ultra-processed food. Okay, it's hard to eat a good, clean diet. I admit that. I'm the first one to tell you. It's very hard to eat a clean diet. So we know the diet's involved. And a lot of things that we get in that ultra-processed food messes up the GI tract. So we can't produce the brain chemistry that we need for the brain. It's all being contaminated, and things are just not working right. We're not making our serotonin like we should. We're not making the GABA. We're not making a lot of these neurochemicals that our brain relies on. And, you know, we're not getting things like the omega-3s and so on in our diet. Really big.
And, you know, so this time of year, soup is a good thing. And I'll tell you, I was just shopping yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
After the Saints game. Oh. And I just felt like leaving the house because it was a win, right? But it wasn't the kind I wanted. I was looking at soups and cans of soup. Like, it's not just broth and vegetables and chicken. If you're getting chicken noodle soup, because that's what you want to get. It's about to get cold again in a couple days.
That's right.
So it's like, I want a good, like, hearty sandwich, a good bowl of soup. But even cracking open a can of soup, even those that say there's less ingredients, when you start looking at it, it's like everything modified this, modified that. So that's not what you're talking about when you say clean. Though it feels like you're not eating fast food, but you're getting into that packaged, pre-processed again.
Yeah, like when you bring up a good one there, if we're talking about clean food, and you mentioned something like chicken soup, we make our own, okay? And everybody says, what? Yeah, I mean, we make it and freeze it. Okay, so you want chicken soup? Cool, no big deal. We'll go to the freezer, bring it out, warm it up. Now we've got chicken soup, and we know what's in it.
Sure.
We know exactly what's in it. We know that the chicken was organic. We know that the water was filtered water, and we make our own, or if we use broth or whatever, and we make a lot of our own broths and stuff like that with chicken and turkey left over from Thanksgiving. Gosh, we got to make a big
turkey
broth out.
Sure.
Yeah, you got to make a big turkey soup thing, So it's great. It really tastes good. So that's what we do. But you're right. When you go, you buy the foods. You go to the grocery store. And if you go around the perimeter, I always explain it, go around the perimeter, around the outside, go in, hang a right or left, whichever, and just go around that perimeter. You're going to get foods that are better if you'll seek out those organic vegetables. And the reason we say organic, it just tells you how messed up our food supply really is when you have to pay extra to get food that's not contaminated. That's scary. But that's what we're talking about. It's not that organic food is so much better for you as far as more nutrients. It's less contamination. It's less of those chemicals in there that cause such problems all the time. So that's what we're paying for. And that's what keeps our gut healthy. And if the gut's healthy, the brain's healthy. So,
yeah, that's, again, we said it's going to be Pandora's box when packing here. And like we said, it's, it starts in the gut. And it's all about what you put in that helps to, and this is where today's depression. But a healthy gut really impacts everything from top to bottom, inside and out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's quite a few studies. Matter of fact, there's one I just looked at a few days ago. I can't over the holidays. I can't remember when it was, but a few days ago, and they were talking about they can look at the microbiome and linking that to, okay, this person's headed towards some sort of dementia and or Alzheimer's.
So how common is depression?
I don't have a statistic on. They give you some clinical statistics that are, you kind of look at it and think, no, because almost everybody we talk to coming in as a patient, if you ask them about their medications, they're on some sort of antidepressants. Whether it be one of the new ones or some of the older ones, but they're on some sort of medication for depression. So it's pretty common. It's more common than you think it is. It really is. We
were discussing in the break, is there a genetic link to depression?
There can be. Let's put it that way. There's several things. Like for instance, if, for instance, you have a parent or someone in your family that has some sort of clinical depression, maybe it's bipolar or whatever, then yes, you're susceptible to that. Doesn't mean you're going to get it. Doesn't mean you're going to have that, but you're susceptible to it. And then there's the MTHFR gene. Everybody in the world's heard about this, and everybody's getting tested for it. We get people, it's call after call after call almost daily. Do you check for this genetics? Yes, we do. And it's really common. Something like 40% of the population out there has some sort of mutation in that, what we call methylation. And we, years ago, we did some shows just on that methylation process, how important it is. Because if we can't methylate properly, we can't take a lot of these neurochemicals that we make in the gut and get them ready for the brain. And folate, for instance, folate and folic acid. If you eat your green leafy vegetables, you're going to get folate. Plants have folate. They don't produce folic acid. Synthetically, folic acid. And if you look on a package of something like you bought the ultra-processed foods and you see folic acid, okay, that's a synthetic. And if you happen to have something like that MTHFR gene, you probably can't methylate it properly. So you're going to wind up with less folate, which the brain needs, and more folic acid, which can be built up and be a little bit almost toxic to the brain as far as their functionality.
So is there something at Doctor's Nutrition that can help you methylate, or is there a supplement?
Well, anytime we use the two most common things, which are the B12 and the folate, we always use a methylated form. It's a methylcobalamin. So if you pick up a package and it says cyanocobalamin, that's a synthetic, if you will, B12. The natural form of the B12 is the methylcobalamin. We use that, a methylated folate. methylfolate is natural. Our body can use it naturally, and it does a great job. So we always start there. Then there's things it can do to help that. For instance, one of the things that we use a lot of times in treatment is SAMe, S-adenosylmethionine. And what S-adenosylmethionine does is helps with that methylation process. It's a big methyl donor and helps the liver, and it also helps the brain function.
So I know this is, again, another Pandora's box. What can be done to prevent this?
Well, I think that the number one thing is to start with a good, clean diet. I mean, like we just talked about the soup and thing. Start with that clean diet. That's number one. Look for and make sure that you're getting enough of the right kind of fats. Now, one of the biggest problems that we get into with folks, we know in the American diet we get a lot of omega-6s, which we need omega-6s. We have to have that. We can't make them in our bodies, so we have to get them from the diet. But at the same time, we also need omega-3s. That's harder to do. Eating nuts, some nuts have it, like walnuts and so on. Your fatty fish, cod, things like that. Sardines are great. Great source of omega-3s. So making sure that you're getting some omega-3s, staying away from the packaged processed food, which messes up the microbiome in the gut. And because people say, well, I don't eat I don't take antibiotics or anything. If you're eating this ultra processed food, you're getting ingredients in there that have been made or come from animals or whatever that have a lot of antibiotics. And so that kind of messes up. And for instance, the glyphosate, I don't know whether people even know what glyphosate is, but it's basically the chemical in Roundup. And what it does is it totally messes up the microbiome in the gut. And when you do that, the brain's going to suffer.
Well, we need Roundup.
No,
we have to have that, right? We have to get rid of the weeds. So, yeah, exactly. You don't need to just use the weed eater.
Right. There's, when you look at the sustainable farming that's going on now, and there's a guy out there you can follow, and his name's Joel Salatin. And great guy, does a lot of the sustainable farming and stuff. Matter of fact, RFK uses him as one of his sounding boards. So he's been talked about a lot in this election cycle, because that's one of the people because he does some pretty big sustainable farming. And he's very big on it. And he teaches courses in how to do sustainable farming without Roundup, without all the pesticides, without all that stuff. And that's really important in the food supply.
Well, I mean, that goes right back into if you're using that, it goes into the water, goes in the ground, it goes in the water supply. If you're doing your best and you have a garden in the backyard, right, and you're trying to eat good, clean, healthy food, you're cooking and preparing what you're growing, all of that stuff counts, especially whenever you're pulling it from the earth that you've used a pesticide in, you're putting it on the stove. That's all going to be impacted that way.
Yep.
So, Dr. Jim, what are some of the natural treatments for depression?
We always start when a person comes in and says that they actually have depression, or even if they're being treated, and maybe they're taking a prescription drug for depression. We go back and start looking at the natural side of this. Now, that's because that's our job. Where you start, vitamin D, okay, probiotics, omega-3s. Those are the three biggies. Because if you look at the microbiome in these people, it's probably a little messed up, so we want to reestablish that. And at the same time, make sure we always talk about clean food, try to get them away from the packaged processed stuff as much as possible. But at the same time, we look at and just say, okay, let's check that vitamin D level, let's check that B12 level, let's look at that. And there's some other things, believe it or not, even DHEA. And as we age, and we know that depression tends to hit the older group, my age group, so to speak, a little harder than others. We always look at that DHEA because it tends to go down as we age. Okay, some people's just drops right off the bottom of the earth here. It's like it's gone. And when they do, they're going to be depressed. And you can give them just a tiny bit. Doesn't take huge amounts. Just a tiny bit of something like DHEA. Wow. Oh man, that works wonders. So that if you just clean up everything and just put everything back together. I always call it putting Humpty Dumpty back together.
There you go.
Yeah,
I have to see lion's mane on the list. That's a good one for me because I've been taking a bit of that.
Lion's mane is really good. It's great for the brain. And a lot of people come in and ask about it. And yes, what we find on lion's mane, a lot of times the person themselves, they'll take it and they say, well, I don't know whether this stuff's really working. And their spouse or significant other is going to say, oh yeah, it's working.
It's definitely working.
Yeah, it's working. Yeah, don't stop.
Going into the natural side, is there something that you can do there in the office when it comes to testing for depression? Or is that something that you're going to have to go to another office for?
Well, no, I mean, there's not a, psychologist or somebody like that do some, testing for it. There's not a blood work that's going to show you, hey, you're depressed. Right. That just doesn't show up that way, unfortunately. But you can start looking at things like your vitamin D status, like your vitamin B12 status, those kind of things. That's going to be things that's going to complicate the problem. If you think you are having a little bit of depression or suffering with it a little bit, those are things you want to start with. You can always do the microbiome. Now, we could do some of the stool tests to find, and there's a lot of those. There's some really nice stool testing that can show you, and stool and urine, that can show you how you use the metabolites of the various neurochemistries. Great stuff, kind of pricey, but really good if we can't find another way. The reason it's kind of pricey, so we'll just start saying, okay, let's just fix this microbiome. Let's get you some good probiotics, that kind of thing, and work from there.
See how it goes from there.
See how it goes from there.
And of course, it goes without saying the MTHFR mutation, that can be checked because that you mentioned that is a genetic marker that you would say. We were talking about numbers of which genes they're testing, but you said it could be hundreds.
Well, the medically, years ago, and I've been dealing with genetics for probably close to 20 years now. And I can remember 20 years ago, they talked about, there was two biggies that we knew of at the time. It was the 1298 and the 677, and they have now renamed those. So God knows they change all the time. But those two particular genes are kind of what they looked at for that MTHFR, which is a methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. And that's a big mouthful.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, right? Especially for Monday morning. But what they found was those particular genes block the processing of the B12, the folates, and so on, and that's a lot of your neurochemistry right there. So they found that. So now that's kind of what they look at. But when you start, now that we know about the methylation process, gosh, there's hundreds of genes involved in the CBS, the COMT, you name it, so on. So it gets really complicated in that respect. But if you know you've got an MTHFR mutation, you probably got some of these other ones too. Because I don't think I've ever seen anybody that had just one mutation. I mean, if you start looking at our genome, it's pretty big, 23,000 genes that do things. One or two of them is going to be a little messed up, And that just tells us, okay, what have we got to do to stay healthy? We got to work on getting the right kind of nutrients in there, that right kind of B12, the right kind of folate, avoiding the kind of folic acids and stuff that are kind of synthetic that we may not be able to process properly. So it goes a lot into that diet, lifestyle thing, and that's the biggies.
Of course. So
I'm Dr. Fox, and I want to thank you for watching this YouTube video. Be sure and hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell so you'll be notified on any upcoming videos that we have coming up. And thank you again for watching our YouTube videos.